Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mike. So just a quick sound check. We're good? Sound check, we're good? All right, good. So, as each one of us is sitting here tonight, we have a group of neurons in our brain about the size of a half of a grain of rice called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's about 22,000 neurons. It's a very, very, very small structure right between your eyes and in the very base of the brain. And that particular structure controls the timing of your sleep and controls the timing within every cell in your body, without exception. And it's unique, and it from a medical perspective, based on this current literature that's coming out, it has everything to do with when you may have your stroke, or when you might have your heart attack, or at what point would you develop diabetes. So this particular structure that has everything to do with the timing of our sleep and when things happen during the day in a 24-hour day, it controls a great deal, including our health risk. And so as a family physician, providing obviously primary care, family medicine kinds of stuff, and as a sleep doctor who takes care of sleep disorders like sleep apnea and insomnia and things like that, we're often telling our patients to make sure that you're getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep on a regular basis. And we're emphasizing how important that is, and you need to really make sure you're getting your 7 to 8 hours like it's like a checklist that you're supposed to do. And as I've been watching the literature over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of literature looking at circadian rhythm disorders and timing of sleep and timing of things during the daytime. And in the last 2 years or so, I've really been wondering is just setting the limit of getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep, is that good enough? Or is that a partial truth? Could we be doing better? And is it not just about getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep, but it's actually matching the internal timing of your own, each one of us has in terms of timing of sleep. And we'll talk more about that. So today's talk is about circadian timing of sleep and how that may have something to do with longevity, how it impacts your potential for early disability from stroke, dementia, cardiovascular disease, and so that's where I would like to go. Now, in full disclosure, what you're seeing tonight is kind of an amalgam of my thought process based on current literature. Since 2017, where the first description of the timing mechanism in each one of our cells was discovered, the information regarding circadian timing and health and how it impacts our disease processes is exploding. And so this information is coming out very rapidly, but it's messy. And because each study is looking at one specific area, like blood sugar control and circadian timing of sleep, or cardiovascular risk and circadian timing. There's not any big studies that kind of bring things together. So what I'm going to present to you tonight is, it's messy, and I've tried my best to bring it together to what I think we're going to go to Sleep Medicine 2.0 in terms of telling you not just about getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep, but maybe focusing a little bit on timing and how you can manage the timing of your sleep to try to squeeze out some additional benefit in terms of improving your health risk over time. But what you're going to see tonight is my thought process. It's my thought process in action. If we have this talk 2 years from now, it probably will be very different because the literature is changing like very rapidly. So buckle up, because we're going to move pretty quickly, and I'm going to try to move this along. But I'm also open to questions. So as we're going along, just to facilitate the talk, if somebody has got a question, I'll stop for a minute. We can quickly answer it if it helps the overall discussion. So tonight, the plans are to talk about what are circadian rhythms, talk a little bit about circadian rhythm disorders, circadian impact on physiology, potential health outcomes, and then what you can do to actually manage timing of sleep and get some sense of how you might want to make some changes for yourself. Before we can really dig in, though, because obviously you're not sleep medicine trained, so I should give you a little bit of background on sleep. So sleep is not an on-off phenomenon. It's very, very complicated. It's a very complicated process that takes place in our brains, and it's elegant. And if you look at how we fall asleep, how we stay asleep, how we wake up, it's elegant. But just one of the basic points is there's actually different stages of sleep. It's not just I'm asleep or I'm not. There's actually different stages. So there's stage 1 sleep, which is kind of transitional sleep, light dozing. You're probably aware that you're drifting off to sleep but still awake enough to understand things around. Stage 2 sleep is where we spend most of our sleep time, and that's a little deeper sleep. Stage 3 sleep is about 25% of our sleep. That's slow wave sleep. Slow wave sleep occurs in the first third of the night, okay? And it's important with respect to physical regeneration. So in terms of recovering from a marathon, or just you've had a long day and you're recovering. So physical recovery occurs during stage 3 sleep, okay? Then there's stage REM sleep, another 25% of our sleep. Is this working? Yeah. So it's important in terms of cognition, memory, and emotion. So that's in terms of our emotional health and our cognitive processing, that kind of thing. And that happens in the last third of the night. So key features are stage 3 sleep happens in the first third. Stage REM sleep occurs towards the end of the night. So just think about this. So if you cut your sleep short by 2 hours, it actually has substantial impact on memory, emotional control. Your ability to control your emotions and your ability, especially short-term memory, is severely impacted by cutting the last 2 hours, because you're cutting into stage REM. So this is why, if you look at high school students who are going to West Valley and starting at 7 in the morning when they should be sleeping, we're deliberately cutting into their sleep by 1 to 2 hours. That is why we're seeing higher rates of anxiety, higher rates of depression, and higher suicidality in that age group. And that's a national phenomenon. And if you actually delay the sleep time, the school start time later, you see huge drops in depression, anxiety, and suicide rate, but you also see about a 15% increase in academic performance and ACT and SAT scores. So it's a big difference. But this is true for everyone, not just high school students. The other base point is how much sleep do we need in a 24-hour day? And so when I started my medical training back in the 1990s, it was anywhere from 5 to 9 hours was considered within the bell curve of normal. We now know through a lot of large study, there's a big study here, 4.4 million participants, that if you look at outcomes, so heart attack risk, cancer, stroke, all cause mortality, the sweet spot is between 7 and 8 hours of sleep a day for everyone, okay? So if you take a look, so it's a pretty steep U curve on each side, right? So if you're a short sleeper getting less than 7 hours of sleep, the all-cause mortality goes up by 14%. If you're a long sleeper sleeping more than 9 hours of sleep, your all-cause mortality goes up by 34%, which is pretty big if you think about it. Now, so you might say, well, why is that higher? So the reason this is probably higher is probably sleep apnea. So if you have sleep apnea, your sleep is disrupted, you're tired during the day, you're sleeping longer, both during the day and night. So the mortality there is probably being driven by untreated sleep apnea, would be my guess. So, but the point is on each side, yeah. So you will see this each year as we go through the time change that we do in the spring and the fall, right? So we change by an hour, right? So if you look at national statistics in terms of cardiac events nationwide, so every year when we do a time jump, spring forward, fall back, there's a 15% increase in cardiovascular events nationwide. So just that 1 hour time change. Nationwide, the ERs the next day or two will see If you look at all the numbers, it works out to be about 15% increase nationwide, and it happens every year. So, anyway. The other important point is, in terms of sleep deprivation, recovering from sleep deprivation is at minimum 4 days. Some studies show longer, but for just basic utility and things you just need to remember, 4 to 5 days to recover from 1 night of sleep deprivation, which is pretty phenomenal. So it takes much longer. So, okay. All right. And many studies show that some of the psychomotor vigilance testing, like your ability to respond to things like problem solving and physically respond to stimuli, it can take up to 2 weeks in some studies to recover from sleep deprivation. All right. So physiologic consequences of insufficient sleep. So from a cardiovascular perspective, you see an increase in sympathetic tone, which is the fight or flight response, and a depression of the parasympathetic tone, higher levels of norepinephrine. We also see something called endothelial dysfunctions. Endothelial dysfunction is the lining of the vessels of our hearts and brains. So as we, for example, exercise, the arteries should dilate for more blood flow so that your heart gets more blood to do the work, right? So in endothelial dysfunction, you don't get that dilation response to exercise. So it's an abnormal response to appropriate stimuli. So that's called endothelial dysfunction. So, and so as a result, you can start seeing a bump in the blood pressure. So on average, with insufficient sleep, you'll see a bump at about 13/7 in the blood pressure. And so normally at nighttime, there's about a 20-25% drop in your blood pressure at night, and that's called dipping, nighttime dipping, and that's a normal physiologic response normally. But if you have insufficient sleep, you become a non-dipper. You don't see a drop in the blood pressure, and that also drives the cardiovascular events. So because of short sleep, you see a 17% increase in hypertension, a 26% increase in coronary artery disease, and a 16% in cerebrovascular disease or strokes. Okay, so those are big numbers. Okay, looking at metabolic and just from insufficient sleep, not getting enough sleep. So if you're not getting enough sleep, you lose prefrontal glucose control. So the prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that actually regulates your behavior. So just looking at this area, so there's this whole, in terms of the brain's ability to manage blood sugar, it's now what they call type 3 diabetes. Is the new, I don't know if that's official yet, but that's the moniker that's being spun around right now. Anyway, you have impaired prefrontal glucose use. You see increased insulin resistance, higher levels of cortisol, higher levels of ghrelin and leptin. We're going to talk about these a little bit later, but that drives overeating. And you also have dysregulation of your body's ability to maintain body temperature and altered energy expenditure. So as such, you see because of insufficient sleep, there's a 38% increase for obesity and 1.95 times for type 2 diabetes. Okay, those big numbers. Okay, from an immune inflammatory viewpoint, so poor sleep does influence our immunity. It makes us less able to respond to external stimuli. So for example, a vaccine. If you're sleep deprived and you get your flu shot, you're not going to get the same response as if you were caught up on your sleep when you got your flu shot. Okay, so I guess this fall, when you get your flu shot, it's better to be caught up on your sleep to get the best immune response to the flu shot. Because when you're sleep deprived, you will not respond to an external stimuli. Okay. Interestingly, also, not sleeping well is pro-inflammatory. So pro-inflammatory in terms of increasing your risk for cardiovascular disease, stroke. So there's, because of the endothelial dysfunction, but also you're plaquing the arteries more. This is a pro-inflammatory state. It causes the arteries to get plaqued up more readily. Okay, so we talked about that. So then in terms of neurocognition, we talked about the real-time effects of not sleeping well in terms of especially short-term memory. So if you're sleep deprived, you're going to have a lot of trouble with short-term memory. You're going to have a lot of trouble with ethical decision-making and problem solving. That's going to be specifically impaired because of sleep deprivation. But long-term, poor sleep also alters the clearance of metabolites from the brain, especially beta amyloid and tau protein. Those are the two proteins that are associated with Alzheimer's disease. And so if you're sleep deprived, the brain is not cleaning itself at night. So if you're chronically sleep deprived, say you're working shift work, or if you're up at night watching Netflix, the brain is not cleaning itself. You will have more of these bad proteins around, beta amyloid and tau protein, and you are thought to be at higher risk for Alzheimer's dementia. All right? So this is just some kind of basic stuff before we jump into the circadian rhythms. So, okay, well, I cut off the top of the thing. But anyway, so what is a circadian rhythm? So circadian rhythm, circadian is Latin for about a day. So basically, a circadian rhythm is the biorhythm that our bodies have in a 24-hour day. All right? And this is ubiquitous to almost all living organisms, bacteria, plants, insects, mammals. All of us have a circadian rhythm of some sort. It's different for each organism, but it is different. These are run by clock genes that are active not just in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, kind of the master center for this, but it's in every single cell of your body. Okay? And so this system of clock genes and timing of sleep is entrained or synchronized with our outside environment by light exposure. Okay? So it's the exposure to full spectrum light, especially morning light, that actually sets the clock and resets the clock every 24 hours. And that's how your body stays on time. And that's also how you know, like, you're no longer in Fairbanks, you're in New York. And when you come home, you can adjust back to Fairbanks. And that's also why we have so much trouble this time of year, and as we're transitioning in Fairbanks. The kind of light exposure that we have here really is diabolically set up to make our sleep pretty awful. And so anyway, and this system even operates even in total darkness for a while, but eventually it will want to be entrained or want to be synchronized with the outside environment. Okay. So examples, in the 24-hour rhythm, are, so between 12 a.m. and 6 a.m., there's deep sleep, growth hormone is released. Between 6 a.m. and 12 noon, there's a peak in cortisol, there's maximum alertness, and then peak cognition and strength. So if you're going to do strength training or train for a marathon, that's better between 12 and 6 p.m. And then at 6 p.m. to 12 a.m., melatonin rises, and that's when we wind down for sleep. So these are all examples of timing. Right? So I kind of find this whole genetic thing kind of pretty cool. So there's 4 genes that actually control our time and sleep. So the main one that drives things forwards, that wakes us up, is the clock and BMAL genes. The ones that kind of wind things down and turn things down are the period genes, the cry genes, and the REV-ER genes. They all kind of downregulate and get us ready for bed. So it's this very elegant process that was described. It actually won the 2017 Nobel Prize, the guys that came up with this. And so here, basically, it's the positive limb. Basically, it's waking us up. And as these 2 genes are transcribing proteins, the proteins it's a dimer, 2 proteins together. And then on one end, it kind of self-reinforces, helps keep waking us up. At the same time, there's a negative feedback loop that develops and kind of starts shutting things down. And this elegant chemical clock every 24 hours wakes us up and puts us down to bed at night. It's elegant. It's amazing. And these guys picked it up in 2017. It's this beautiful system. Okay? So how this integrates, so in terms of light entrainment, so I was telling you, so all of this entrainment comes through light, and especially full spectrum light is really best. And it enters the eye, and it hits specialized retinal ganglion cells at the back of the retina. And it's very sensitive to 480 nanometer light, which is very close to computer screens and television screens and iPhone screens. So that's why people are telling you to avoid digital media at night, because these particular ganglion cells are so sensitive to this. They connect to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, that 22,000 neuron, half grain of rice grain sized structure in that base of the brain. then it actually sets the clock for the entire system, and then it sends out peripheral neurological signals, but also hormonal signals to the rest of the body that synchronizes every single cell in your body, so that the master clock sets the rhythm for the day. And it's this very elegant system. Yeah. So, and then just this little clinical pearl. So evening blue light from the screens delays the release of melatonin, and then that pushes. And again, that's at 460, 480 nanometer light that our screens emit. Right. Okay, so there's some differences in terms of melatonin release and how sensitive we are to light. So it turns out, as you would expect, young children are very sensitive to low amounts of bright light. They respond very aggressively to light exposure, and they just require the slightest nudge to get their clocks synchronized. As we get older, things slow down a little bit, and so we tend to require a little bit brighter light, and so if we're trying to address a circadian problem, I'll use light therapy plus melatonin to juice the system to get it to go the direction that I want. All right. In older adults, so as we get older, there's two things that come into play in terms of the circadian timing of sleep. So one has to do with our eyes. So if you're developing cataracts or retinal problems, macular degeneration, glaucoma, that can affect the way the retinal ganglial cells actually pick up the light signal and synchronize the brain. So you can have visual problems that actually contributing to your sleep problems, okay, because you're no longer in training, right? The second thing is the brain, as it's getting older, it doesn't produce as much, it's not as aggressive about producing melatonin as it was when it was younger. And we just see that you don't get a nice, robust response to melatonin and light exposure as you did when you were younger. So that is why in older people, you tend to see the circadian timing of sleep get sloppy. So when an adult is in their middle, like in their 40s, 50s, they'll have a nice synchronized, I'm going to bed at 10 and I'm getting up at 7. And then now as they're getting into their 60s and 70s, the timing of sleep starts to shift. It's not quite as defined, both in terms of falling asleep and staying asleep. And that's that sloppy, that's the loss of the brain's ability to control the timing of sleep. And there are things you can do about that, around that. So as opposed to kids require very little light to set the system, synchronize the system. You can use high dose light exposure in the mornings, 10,000 lux plus, and longer duration of light exposure to actually force the system. And then you can cleverly add a little bit of melatonin at the right timing to actually juice the system and actually synchronize things to get it. We can talk about how to do that later. All right. There are some defined circadian rhythm disorders. Okay, so there are two. There's 6 of them, but the ones that are so the delayed sleep phase syndrome. These are your night owls. The advanced sleep wake phase sleep disorder. These are your Iowa farmers. These are the people that are going to bed at 7, 8 o'clock in the evening, and they're getting up at 4 a.m. Right? And in both these cases, you could confuse them for insomnia. So if you're a night owl, you could say, well, I'm having trouble falling asleep. Whereas if you're advanced sleep wake phase syndrome disorder, these are people that have trouble staying asleep. So they're waking up 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, even though they've gotten 7, 8 hours of sleep. They're waking up and they can't get back to sleep. All right? And so it could be confused as insomnia, so people start hammering away with using sleep aids. It's good, man. It happens all the time. So it could be confused for insomnia, so people start hammering away at this with sleep aids. That's the wrong move. The right move is actually, strategically using melatonin or strategically using light therapy to actually adjust things. All right. There's irregular sleep waves. There are some central nervous system disorders that actually impact the circadian timing. And these are central nervous system disorders that you can see with patients that have had strokes or vascular disease of the brain. They're non-24-hour sleep cycle and irregular sleep wave syndrome. Also included in the disorders that are considered circadian disorders are shift work disorders. So these are people that are working when they should be sleeping or vice versa. And then jet lag. These are all the main sleep disorders. Those are fairly defined. They're treated differently. And so a little more detail. We are going to make available the copy of this if you're interested. There's just more detail, but I keep moving. So there's a 24-hour schedule that happens, and we just touched on that earlier. But so some interesting points. So at 2 a.m., your body temperature is at its lowest, and this is when growth hormone is released. So early 2 a.m. At 6 a.m., there's a normal cortisol surge, which is important in terms of prepping for the day. So you wake up, so the body puts some coal on the fire, get a little juice of cortisol. So more awake, more alert. You get the blood sugar rolling, get the blood pressure up. So that's the job of cortisol, to kind of prep you for the day, get things going. At 9 a.m., you see a peak in testosterone, and that's also when you're most alert. So if you're a student, most of the time, your best study hours are going to be first thing in the morning in terms of your ability to remember things and actually put things in a long-term memory. Okay? 12 p.m. peak reaction time. This is also when you're most have the highest cardiovascular efficiency. Best muscle strength is around 3 p.m. coordination. So if you're training for a marathon or a performance-based kind of sport, afternoon, early evening training is going to be a little bit better in terms of actually building muscle, building strength, that kind of thing. As opposed to the body low temperature at 2 a.m., the body high temperature is at 6 p.m. That's also when your lung function's the best. Melatonin, if you're assuming that you're sleeping from 11 to 7, melatonin will start to rise 2 hours prior to the bedtime, so in this case 9 p.m. And then at 12 a.m. the sleep onset, and then sleep onset and cell repair begins. So this is the kind of the schedule that the body has, and all the organs that are involved are synchronized, so everything plays out as it should in its proper time. So in terms of circadian timing, this is where it starts to get messy because of the individual studies, but so I'm going to share what I can here. So again, we touched on, so in terms of cardiovascular rhythms, so blood pressure normally shows a diurnal pattern, and it starts to dip 10 to 20% during sleep. These are your dippers. And remember, if you have a disordered timing of sleep or you're short sleep, you become a non-dipper, and your blood pressure starts to rise again at about 13 to 7 millimeters of mercury, 13 systolic, 7 diastolic over time. Okay? But if you become a non-dipper, you have a 3 times higher cardiovascular event risk. So your risk for cardiovascular disease starts to jump up right away. Okay? Interesting, in addition to the morning surge in blood pressure and heart rate, it's also procoagulant. So if you're sleep deprived, the little platelets that actually are in charge of clotting our blood every time we cut ourselves, the platelets start to malfunction, and you clot more easily. So not only is your blood pressure going up, but you're also more likely to form small blood clots that would increase your risk for a stroke or a heart attack. All right? And then as such, you're also at higher risk for plaque rupture. Okay? So then downstream, then there's higher risk of stroke, myocardial infarctions, and typically these vascular events typically occur 6 a.m. to noon. So if you've heard of somebody waking up with an event or shortly in that morning in the first part of the day, it's likely that there's an underlying sleep disorder that's playing a role. Right? Also, it's also true for vascular arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation. That's a very common heart arrhythmia. And you'll also see that that's going to be higher in the morning hours because of sleep deprivation and circadian timing issues. Metabolically, there's also, in terms of circadian shifts, so your body's best ability to manage blood sugar or glucose tolerance is best in the morning. So it's 20 to 30% higher in the early part of the day relative towards the end of the day. So you see so if you have an abnormal sleep pattern because of circadian timing or your short sleep, you can see postprandial blood sugars start to climb. So the blood sugars after eating start to go up, and they're not because the blood sugars are not properly managed. It also, if you're sleep deprived because of circadian rhythm disorders, fatty acid oxidation is favored in the fasting state. And so typically, if if you're sleep deprived, your body's tendency is not to burn fat, it's to store fat. So if you're sleep deprived because of a circadian rhythm disorder or any other sleep disorder, your body's natural metabolic tendency is going to want to be to add fat, right? It also alters the gut microbiome. So there's also a circadian timing, and you see if you have shift work changes or disrupted circadian timing of sleep, the gut microbiome changes. And that potentially has, if you look at some of the literature looking especially around mood disorders, so the largest serotonin producing organ in the body is your gut. So, and the gut microbiome changes how your gut produces serotonin. So serotonin's in charge of like what your mood is, right? So if the gut microbiome is being altered because of sleep, you could alter your mood potentially. I mean, mechanistically, you could potentially change your mood as a result of that. And again, then in terms of the metabolic impact on the liver, the clock gene disruption actually also favors fatty liver, high cholesterol, and again, type 2 diabetes. So fatty liver disease in this country is the #1 cause of liver transplant as of, 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, it's the #1 cause this right now. So there's with sleep, there are some interesting hormonal relationships. So melatonin, again, that's associated with the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock. Melatonin is secreted by the pineal gland, and it's secreted 2 hours prior to the bedtime, okay? Again, it's suppressed by blue or white light, and it's basically that's how your brain knows it's nighttime and it's time to get ready to go to bed. Okay? Cortisol peaks about 30 to 45 minutes prior to waking. Again, that's the hormone that kind of juices the system. It fires up the immune system. It fires up your blood sugar control, gets the blood pressure up. It kind of preps you for the day. Okay. Insulin is also part of energy management. So again, insulin sensitivity follows a robust circadian rhythm. Again, your insulin sensitivity, your ability to manage blood sugar in a healthy way is going to be highest in the morning, lowest at night. And again, eating, so in this case, and this is important with respect to weight management and obesity, eating late impairs glucose tolerance by 20 to 25% in healthy adults. And it's the key driver for metabolic disease and shift worker. So good example. So we have a lot of military bases here in the Fairbanks area. So a lot of these young guys, they'll leave the military, they'll go work at Fort Knox. Fort Knox has one of the worst shift works schedules that I've ever seen. It's unbelievable. And it was worse up until a number of years ago. But they're sleeping on average somewhere between 5 and 6 hours a night routinely. I didn't think it was possible for somebody to gain 60 pounds in like 6 months. But this is why. So the impairment of glucose tolerance by that amount will drive a weight gain 30, 60 pounds. And I've seen it. And nothing else changed in the diet. They're working out the same. They're eating about the same. Nothing else really changed than that. So growth hormone, most of your growth hormone is released during slow wave sleep. Growth hormone as adults, not so much to make us taller, but basically growth hormone is in charge of repair. So you need growth hormone to repair cells, repair injuries, repair the damage that occurs on a daily basis. Another really cool new is 2 hormones, leptin and ghrelin. So leptin is a peptide. It's a protein that is made by the fat cells. And it basically tells your brain that we have enough energy stores on board, you don't need to eat. All right? And then the opposite of that is ghrelin. Ghrelin is a peptide protein that is produced by the stomach that tells your brain that you're hungry and it's time to eat. Right? These are 2 new proteins that have been recently described. And so leptin, so you should be normally the least hungry at night and then most hungry in the morning. So leptin levels are usually highest at night and ghrelin levels should be higher in the morning. So you tend to be hungrier in the morning. So that should be the normal pattern unless you're sleep deprived. If you're sleep deprived because of circadian timing, that gets reversed and you start to pack on the weight. And there are a lot of research around this right now. We'll dig in on that just a little bit more. So in terms of type 2 diabetes, because of like in shift workers, your risk for type 2 diabetes is increased 3 times. Again, there's about 25% worsening of glucose tolerance from a single night of sleep deprivation. And if you have 1 hour of sleep deprivation, just like 1 hour of social jet lag, we'll talk about that. So social jet lag is, so if you're a high school student and you're going to bed at 9 p.m. and getting up at 6 a.m. to go to West Valley, that's your school week schedule. But your weekend schedule is midnight, 1 o'clock till 10. That's like jumping time zones on the weekend. That's like flying to Chicago for the weekend and then flying back. That level of sleep deprivation that occurs, the risk for weight gain is increased 17 times. All right? So kids, so not having a regular schedule and having this social jet lag phenomenon occurring can actually seriously drive weight gain. We're seeing that as well. And so especially in young people, they're staying up at night because of digital media. All right. All right. So again, this ghrelin is kind of the hot topic right now in obesity medicine, but also in diabetes. So there's 2 aspects. One, there's the circadian timing. We talked on that earlier. The ghrelin is typically highest in the morning, and that's when you're supposed to be most hungry, and lowest in the evening. So there's a circadian rhythm to that. But you can also train it. So, and we've all experienced that. So ghrelin, and we have a family member, for example. So we have a family member in our family that is very attuned to the timing of meals. Like it's 8 o'clock, and they know because they start getting hungry, and that they start getting irritable, and it's a timed thing. So there's a little bit of trained aspect of this. So you can see a little bit of a bump in ghrelin because of habit, if you will. And then as you eat, then the ghrelin levels drop. So even if you didn't have a watch on, you might know it's lunchtime because you start feeling hungry. And there's this entrained aspect to that as well. Interestingly, if you're sleep deprived, so usually what happens is you start to get hungry at lunchtime, you have lunch, ghrelin drops, and it stays down close to dinner time, and then the ghrelin level starts to come up, right? But if you're sleep deprived, what happens is ghrelin levels, you can start to get hungry, you eat your lunch, and then the ghrelin level drops, but then it comes up within an hour later. The ghrelin level starts to rise about an hour after eating in somebody who's not sleeping on their circadian timing of sleep, or if they're sleep deprived. So the ghrelin levels behave abnormally in a sleep deprived state. The ghrelin levels start, so people tend to overeat, and they tend to overeat high calorie foods in response. So they tend to eat the Twinkies and the Coke and those high calorie density foods. So that drives this. Okay. So again, we touched on this. And then, so this is also interesting too. So I don't know if my mother's told this, but they always said don't always eat breakfast, right? Don't skip breakfast. Well, here's why. So if you don't eat breakfast, the ghrelin levels are higher throughout the day, and you tend to overeat all day. If you eat first thing in the morning, your ghrelin levels will be lower during the day, and there'll be less of a drive to gain weight. So eating in the morning physiologically makes sense, all right? Again, if you're sleep deprived because of timing mismatch problem with your sleep, or if you're not getting enough sleep, this tends to go off the rails. Ghrelin levels are higher. You tend to pack the weight on. All right. So again, so meals shifted up to 4 hours later. You basically have you change the ghrelin leptin ratio. You tend to pack on the weight. So there's a lot of preference for eating early in the morning to drive the ghrelin levels down, drive the chances of becoming obese down. Yeah. All right. So in terms of metabolic, cardiovascular, looking at circadian timing, we talked about the dippers, non-dippers, the blood pressure. surge and the platelet aggregation, plaque rupture, all increasing risk for heart disease and stroke, atrial fibrillation risk. We talked about the glucose tolerance and the microbiome, so we talked on that. And so in terms of looking at the literature, in terms of event clustering, so MI risk is, again, highest between 6 a.m. and noon for the reasons that we talked about, and because of the platelet aggregation, the cortisol levels, and endothelial dysfunction. If you're someone who's taking aspirin for heart disease, this may be an important point, because if your platelets are, if you're sleep deprived and in the morning hours you're at the highest risk for heart disease, it would be a reason to maybe take your aspirin in the evening so that the platelet, anti-platelet activity is highest in the morning. So in terms of when you would take your aspirin, at least mechanistically speaking, that would be a reasonable idea. Shift work, we talked about, so shift workers in heart disease, you see a 41% increase at risk of coronary artery disease in people who work shift work for more than 5 years. Rotating shift work also increases stroke risk. Yeah, and again, it's this pro-inflammatory endothelial dysfunction that's driving that. Yeah.
Wait, is that because they can't get a good sleep as a shift worker, or they?
Yes. Yeah. So and that's the point of this. So they're not getting enough sleep time because of the shift work. So there's not enough time. But on top of that, when they are getting sleep, it's off their normal cycle. So if they're typically a 10 to 7 person, right, and they're sleeping from 7 a.m. to 1, it's a compounded problem. It's not just the insufficient sleep. You're sleeping when you should be awake because your whole body is primed to be awake during the daytime. Everything is off, and that's
100% is insane.
It's huge, yeah. So when I see a patient who's a shift worker, first thing I tell them out of the gate is like, so somebody has to work the night shift. I get it, and it's usually an entry-level position, and they pay a lot of money, and there's lots of benefits. But as soon as you can, and it's practical, like don't be baited by the high-dollar, high-benefit package, because this is not. Those are big numbers, like, and these people are not healthy. If you, just think about the people you know at work. I don't want to pick on Fort Knox, but just think about the people you know that work shift work and have done so for a long time. Just look at them. Seriously. And just know their health history. They're overweight. They oftentimes have developed type 2 diabetes. They're starting to develop heart rhythm issues. They're developing coronary artery disease earlier. They're aging faster than the rest of us. This is why. Okay? All right. Okay. In terms of mental health, huge issue as well. So in sleep medicine, there's this huge overlap between poor sleep and anxiety and depression and bipolar disorder. And it's both directions. So depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder can make your sleep worse, but also if you're having poor sleep, that also increases your risk for anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder. So it's a bidirectional relationship, all right? And also big numbers. So circadian, the reason I go hunting for circadian mismatch in my primary care and my sleep medicine patients is 80% of them have a mismatch if they have depression. So I go looking for that. And again, it typically can be addressed very nicely with a little bit of strategically placed melatonin and light therapy. Same thing's true for seasonal affective disorder, bipolar disorder, and PTSD. It's very, very important. So if you're going to optimize someone's treatment for their mental health, you really need to be focusing on the sleep and timing of sleep. Yes?
So the seasonal affective disorder, which we probably experience here quite a bit in
Right.
last week, and so we're having a lot of darkness, and I find that it's hard for me to wake up.
Yeah.
So how does that fit into this?
In terms of mood?
Well,
How do you manage
in terms
it?
of health, in terms of all these.
Okay, we're going to get to that. So your question is, okay, this is all.
You're going to be speaking longer, generally speaking, outside perhaps the bounds of 8 hours.
Right, unless you manage it.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about how to manage it. Yeah, all right? Okay. So also interestingly, we haven't touched on this at all, is the impact of the altered immune function. So cancer risk. So if you look at breast cancer in night shift nurses, I found a study that showed a 19% increased risk in breast cancer. Okay, 23%. And so people with poor sleep, 23% risk for colorectal cancer, prostate cancer risk, 20%. And again, you can measure that with. So the way you look at how cells are aging is telomere length. So telomeres are like the knot at the end of a string in terms of tying your chromosomes together. So if you've got long, healthy telomeres, that bodes well for long life. If you've got short, unhealthy-looking telomeres, that bodes well for, or doesn't bode well for long life. So you can look at telomere look as a sense of aging. So these are all surrogate markers. And again, these are observational trials. They're not randomized trials. These are observational studies. But clearly, I mean, those are big numbers. There is a trend, at the very least, that there's a higher risk. And again, it has to do with the pro-inflammatory effect of poor sleep on the immune system, how it affects the killer cells and the rest of the immune system. Okay, all right. Yeah, so we'll touch on that. So I'm trying to move. There's a lot more stuff here. I'm trying to keep it so I'm staying on time. All right, so getting to where you were going in terms of how to manage this. So first and foremost, morning bright light. So morning and midday full spectrum bright light as much and as often as possible. And so since I think it was in the 1930s or 40s where we started coming up with the artificial lighting consistently. Our lighting has changed. So this is basically a very structured light exposure that we have. We don't have full spectrum light exposure because we're indoors most of the time. And the light exposure we have is confusing our sleep system greatly. So you want to get full spectrum light, all right? So ways you can do that. So it depends on your living situation. So one way I do that, I have a lot of my patients buy something called a Philips wake-up light. It's made by Philips, obviously, but it's an alarm clock that actually mimics a sunrise in the bedroom. It's a 10,000 lux full spectrum light, and I use that for the alarm clock because the critical time to get light exposure is in the half hour before and after you wake up. So that's the critical time to get the light exposure. Obviously, more is better, so if you can get more light exposure than that, but at minimum, the Philips wake-up light. And then, if you can, so that's that you wake up, you get out of bed, you move to the kitchen, you're getting your coffee. So in the kitchen, if you can get a happy light, or I've seen other people get a arrow garden. So these are the little gardens you can grow herbs to cook with, but that is also full spectrum light. And so you can grow your herbs and get your full spectrum light in your kitchen, same time. So I've seen people do that. If you're in the workplace, you can get a happy light for your desk, 10,000 lux again, and use that only in the morning. So it's much full spectrum light as possible. Optimally, if you can go outside, that would be the very, very best. All right. So morning light exposure. Opposite is also true. So you want to avoid light exposure in the evenings if you can. Yeah, because it pushes the bedtime later by blocking melatonin. Right. All right. Very important to keep a consistent wake time. Okay. So you want to be self-reflective on this. I'll just use myself. So I naturally fall asleep like 8:30, 9 o'clock, and I'm starting to wake up 4:30 in the morning, and I can't help myself. I am waking up, and I'll lay in bed and look at the news or whatever, but I'm starting to wake up, and I can't sleep longer. It's not possible for me to sleep longer than that. Even if I went to bed at midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm still waking up then. So each one of us has that sense for when that's happening. I would nail that. That's your wake-up time. And then I would do the math. So 8 hours, so your window for sleep would be 8 hours prior to that. So that's how I would do that, okay? All right, if you are not sure, there's a couple other ways you can get at the wake-up time, all right? One way is you can get a smart watch device. So some of these are very good at telling you the boundaries of sleep, when you fell asleep, when you're starting to wake up. So that can be helpful information. You can also, if you have an iPhone or an Android phone, there's an app called Rise. And it's a circadian rhythm app, actually. It's pretty cool. So it takes the data from your smartwatch, it uploads it to the app, and it will tell you what your optimal time is to wake up, when the optimal time is to fall asleep, when is it best for you to be studying, when it is best for you to work out for weight loss, when is your best time to work out for strength or speed, when would, and it basically maps out the timing of things that I was suggesting earlier. These are all known things. It basically plugs your data in and then projects it for you. But Rise is a really good app. If you're really science-based and you really want to get into it, you can actually get online dim light melatonin testing. So it's dim light melatonin onset. So basically what you do, so it's dim light melatonin onset testing. So what you're doing is you're testing for when your melatonin starts to rise. So remember I told you that the melatonin starts to rise 2 hours prior to the planned bedtime, right? That's a pretty hard mark. So if you know that, then you can figure out when your bedtime is and when your wake-up time should be. And so those can be ordered online. Basically, you spit into these little vials. There's like 12 of them, and you spit into the vials, and then basically they come back and they tell you when the melatonin starts to rise, and that's how you know. Yeah.
So, I work nights, and we all know it's bad for you, because someone's got to be there,
Right.
coming. I know nurses where they flip over on their day schedule. Is that worse for your body, or do you just stay, or is it better for your body overall to stay out? Because I know nurses, they'll go home, they'll take a nap, they'll get up at 1, and then they'll flip back over, and then
Yeah.
the first night.
It's one of the.
We all know it's bad for us. Our bodies are screwed up for good.
Right. So it's the middle ground, right? So you want to think of this like you're flying to the East Coast, right? So if you were flying from here to New York and then back, it's going to be easier to make that jump if you fly here to Chicago to New York, and then halfway. So if I were working night shift, what I would do is on my days off, I would split the difference so that you're staying up a little bit late, but not as late as you would if you were working. I do the middle ground. I pick that. And that way, you're not making as big of a jump, so it's less of a strain from a circadian mismatch viewpoint. Yeah, that's what I would do. Yeah, and it's different, right? Because everybody manages their lives differently and just experience life differently. But in general terms, that's what I would do. And so basically, I usually give that as a hard start point for somebody like yourself. We would start there, and then and then ask them like the follow-up visit in clinic, like what's your experience been? How's that working? Oftentimes they'll have modified it a little bit on their own, but it puts them in the ballpark. Okay. Dim lights in the evening, we talked about that, especially full spectrum light. Keep the bedroom dark and cool. The thing that triggers sleep onset is the differential in body temperature. So in order to get into a deep sleep and fall asleep quickly, you want to be in a cool environment, because it's the cooling of the body temperature that triggers the sleep response. So you can play the system. So one way to do that is take a shower before bed, get heated up a little bit, and let the evaporation cool your body before. So don't hop into bed right away. Let the evaporation cool the body a little bit, and so you get that 1 to 2 degree drop, and then go to bed, and that can help. You can also buy, believe it or not, well, of course you probably believe it. They have sheets now that will blow the proper temperature of air into your mattress and your blankets, so that you're cooled when you should be cooled, but those are they're expensive, but they're quite nice. And from patients that have really gotten into it. Just keep that sleep opportunity 7 to 9 hours. Avoid naps after 3 p.m. Reason you want to avoid naps. All right. So when we're awake during the daytime, our brains produce a chemical called adenosine. So as we're awake, if we're sitting here, we're all building adenosine. But because it's towards the end of the day, the bucket is almost full, the amount of adenosine that we'll make during the day. And so adenosine, when it hits the top of the bucket and starts to spill over, that's what triggers you to fall asleep. So if you will, it's a chemical clock. And so as you're falling asleep, as you're sleeping at night, the adenosine levels drop. The next morning it builds. And then when it starts to spill over, it triggers you to fall asleep. So that's how that helps set the timing of sleep as well, okay? So adenosine is only made when you're awake and broken down when you're asleep. So you want to think of adenosine as sleep pressure. So if you've been up on the midnight flight coming into Fairbanks, right? And you get in and you're like, oh my God, I just have to go home. I got to go to sleep. That pressure to sleep, that's adenosine. That's that pressure to fall asleep. So if you typically sleep 10 until 7, right? And you take a 2-hour nap in the afternoon, what you've done is you've dropped the adenosine levels. So one of two things will happen. One is when it could be your 10 o'clock bedtime and there's not enough adenosine around to push you to sleep, right? Or you'll fall asleep at 10, but you'll wake up around 3 a.m. and you'll go to the bathroom and you'll be like, what the heck? I can't get back to sleep. And the reason is there's not enough adenosine around. So you want to manage adenosine like a resource, and you want to use it like a sleeping pill. So you want to keep your adenosine levels high. Okay, so if you're going to nap, keep the naps short, I would say less than 25 minutes. There is benefit from napping. There are studies that show benefits from naps, and I do little short naps, power naps. I feel better, and my performance is better midday if I do that. But if I nap too long, I have all sorts of trouble sleeping at night. So keep the naps short. Okay? Eat earlier in the day for the reasons that we talked about in terms of ghrelin and appetite and that. This is more physiological. So eat your main meal during the day. Eat a light meal at night. And that, especially if you've got diabetes or you're pre-diabetic, this would be a very smart move. If you're in a situation like, say for example, you're a shift worker and you're pre-diabetic or you're diabetic and you're running into problems, you can actually so this would be one circumstance where time-restricted eating would be appropriate to manage that. So if you restrict the time window in that scenario, so if you're sleep deprived, and you do timed eating, like 8-hour window or 6-hour window, that actually will help manage the blood sugar issue nicely. You want to avoid caffeine after 2 p.m. I tell my patients to avoid caffeine after 11, actually. Caffeine is very variable. Every one of us has a different way of responding to caffeine, but it has a very, very long half-life, and it affects people differently. If someone is making coffee at 2 in the afternoon and I'm around, I just have to smell it, and I'm having trouble sleeping. I mean, I can't, I'm very sensitive to caffeine. Whereas my dad, he could drink a pot of coffee before bed and go to sleep. There's a lot of genetic difference, but if you're, in terms of general, you want to really avoid caffeine. Regular exercise does matter. One of the biggest things you can do to actually improve the depth and quality of your sleep is regular exercise. And it doesn't have to be a lot. 45 minutes of walking can seriously, especially if you're a woman, seriously change the quality and depth of sleep. Exercise can make a big difference. Limiting alcohol. Reason you want to limit alcohol. Alcohol is a sleep disruptor. It will actually seriously disrupt your sleep. So thereby impacting stage 3 sleep and stage REM sleep. So it will impact your ability to recover from the previous day, your memory, your ability to control your mood. All of that gets affected because the sleep is disrupted because of the alcohol. So my general rule of thumb is, like, if you're going to drink 1 to 2 drinks, not within 4 hours of bedtime if possible. You want to get it out of your system so it's not impacting your sleep. And then again, you want to manage the social jet lag. Remember, we talked about the social jet lag as our tendency to stay up later on weekends and not so much on work during the work week. Maybe not an issue if you're retired, but for those of us that are working or going to school, the social jet lag phenomenon is real and has real metabolic consequences. Okay. So that's what I have on circadian rhythms. I guess we're going to talk about melatonin. Yes?
Do you have a comment on when you get a second wind late at night?
Second wind?
Yeah.
Oh, so yes. So that could be an adenosine issue. So it could be either napping or a timing of sleep that's affecting the adenosine levels where you're waking up in the middle of the night and can't get back to sleep.
No, it's more like at 10 o'clock, you're tired, but then it goes away.
Oh, so that's actually more of a, yeah, so that could be a circadian timing issue. So that may be somebody who's trying to go to bed earlier and they get a second one. So what would the natural wake up time of that person be?
Probably 7 or 8.
Or later,
Yeah.
naturally? Yeah, so this is somebody who's actually, so in this example, and correct me if I'm wrong, so this is somebody who typically would go to bed like 12, 2 a.m., and they would sleep in preferentially till 8 or 9, still getting their 7 or 8 hours, right? But they have to work in the morning, and they know that if they don't get their sleep, they're not going to perform well at work. So what they're doing is they're forcing themselves to go to bed early because they know they have to go to bed early. And so what's happening is they dutifully go to bed earlier, and they probably do fall asleep. But then they're waking up because the brain is still primed to keep them awake. They're still awake based on their internal clock. They're a night owl, right? And they're trying to adjust. So that is somebody that I would manipulate the sleep schedule using morning light exposure. Like that would be a person I would full spectrum light in the morning, lots of it. And I would strategically use melatonin in the evening. So lots of bright light in the morning, melatonin. And the way I do melatonin, I use split dosing. And you have to be careful with melatonin. Melatonin is not federally regulated, all right? So 90% of the brands of melatonin out there are crap, all right? So you have to be picky, all right? So if you're looking for a name, Natrol brand, Natrol. I know it's been checked and it's reliable. But you can also look on the little bottle, and if you look around on the bottle and it says somewhere in there USP, that also is probably okay as well. But be picky on your melatonin because there's a lot of garbage out there. So make sure you're taking what you think you should be getting. You do not, so the circadian timing of melatonin, you want to give melatonin 4 to 5 hours prior to the planned bedtime if you want to shift your clock earlier, all right? So I give 0.5 to 1 milligram of melatonin 4 to 5 hours prior to bedtime. So if you're a 10 o'clock, well, if you're a midnight person, right, and you want to go to bed at 10, I would take 0.5 to 1 milligram of melatonin at 6, and then maybe a second, and so that's the clock shifting dose, that earlier dose, very low dose, doesn't take much. And then sometimes I'll give a second dose about an hour before, a 3 milligram dose to help knock you out. I'll give that like an hour before bed. And I do split night dosing, so I'm using lower doses of melatonin and getting a nice effect that way. And that's called split night dosing. Not everybody does it. For me, mechanistically, in terms of our physiology, it makes sense. And I'm using as low a dose as possible. Now, you do have to be careful with melatonin. So this gets this slide. So it can cause some daytime sleepiness, can cause headaches. I have some patients that talk about vivid dreams or nightmares. So it can be problematic for some people. At the low dose that I use, typically not. I don't see that, all right? And because in older adults, it can affect depression. I mean, you just watch the blood pressure and the blood sugars. It can theoretically do that, but again, I'm using a really tiny dose. Yeah.
And again, how many milligrams are you talking about in the blue and the red there?
So what I'm doing?
Well, I mean,
So some of these people I see, some people like taking 20 or 30 milligrams of melatonin at night, like massive doses. Like they're making very expensive urine, and it's not necessary. So I use where you're going to see the glucose and blood pressure and drug interaction issues, those are going to be in people taking with the exception of warfarin. So if you're taking Coumadin or warfarin, probably shouldn't take melatonin. But in terms of the side effects that you're seeing listed here, I'm using, like I said, 0.5 to 1 milligram 4 to 5 hours prior to bed, and then possibly a second dose of 3 milligrams. It works very well, right? And that, obviously check with your doctor, I guess, before you do anything. But this is what I would do. And so the strategic use for the person that we were talking about earlier, our theoretical patient, this would be somebody I would like to move their bedtime earlier by using the melatonin and the bright light therapy, melatonin at night, bright light therapy in the morning, and then, but if that person is, they should stay on that same schedule 7 days a week without fail. It should never change because your natural tendency, you're going to If you jump around, your natural tendency is to go late, especially on weekends, and you get into that social jet lag thing that we talked about, okay? So that's how I would manage this person. So, all right? So let's see what else I had. So I did have like an encore bit I was going to do if we had time, and there weren't any other questions around circadian timing of sleep.
I have a
Yeah.
question. This is for me. I have a system that works for me.
Yep.
But it's quite strange. At night, I'll take, just when I'm getting in bed, usually around 10 o'clock at night, between 10 and 11, I'll take melatonin, 3 milligrams. And then I'll wear blue light glasses and play solitaire on my iPad until...
Blocker glasses?
Blockers.
Got it.
Blue light blockers.
Yep.
Until it bores me and I fall asleep.
Yep.
And I do that 3 times a night. Just that's how it works for my body. I'm dreaming every time I wake up.
So you're taking melatonin 3 times a
No,
day?
no, just the first time.
Okay, got it.
First time, but playing on the iPad and boring myself back to sleep. The second time, and then the third time, I get about the right amount of sleep.
Yep.
But it's interrupted
Right.
in those areas, and I find if I don't drink a lot of water, then I have nightmares.
That would be true.
So, I'm having a lot of water, falling asleep, but I have to get up
Yeah.
from the water. I do not the melatonin, but the rest of it, and then I'm getting really close to that consistent sleep.
Yep. So the
it's
thing,
very weird.
so the thing around that, so there's a neurophysiologic aspect in terms of a chemical model, how our brains operate and how we sleep, right? But there's very much a behavioral aspect, right? How well we sleep oftentimes also has to do with how the sleep environment. Let's take a kid, for example, right? So a young one, right? They're trying to, the parents are trying to put them down to go to school. And so the parent puts them down, but the child doesn't want the parent to leave the room. They can only fall asleep if the parent is in the room, right? Or if they wake up at night, they can only fall back asleep if the parent is in the room or if they crawl in the parent's bed, right? There's nothing magic about the parent. It's the sleep environment. The child has trained themselves to, so same thing could be said of digital media, reading at night, getting up and doing puzzles. And so actually your pattern that you described is, I don't see that as that uncommon, especially in your age group. Yeah, I see there's all sorts of patterns like that. And what I would tell you is, like, if it's working for you, and most importantly, are you feeling rested during the day? So whatever system you've got in place that's working for you is, from my point of view, if you feel rested during the day, you're not falling asleep, you're fairly attentive, I have no comment. Yeah, because, success is success, right? So, yeah. No, but part of it is like, so, God, I wonder if I've trained myself to do that. That would be, and it could be okay. Like if you're enjoying the books that you're reading at night. My dad was that way. He would wake up and read for a couple hours, and then go back to sleep. He probably was a biphasic sleeper, where the sleep schedule was split. Right. Yeah, but he would get up and read, and he was okay with it. And he was actually fairly rested during the day, and typically not napping or dozing a ton, at least most of his years, and which, from a sleep medicine viewpoint, success. Cool. Yeah. So, other questions regarding sleep, circadian rhythm disorders, sleep deprivation. Mike, I think, is going to make the slides available. So.
How detrimental is it to get up to be in the middle of the night?
So then let's talk about what's normal.
That 25%, almost.
Yeah. So let's talk about normal. So what is normal is to get up and urinate twice a night. Okay, that is normal. That's normal range. If you're waking up more than twice a night, then that can be disruptive for sleep, because you get up, you go to the bathroom, you go back to, it takes a while to fall back asleep, then you get up again, 2 or 3 times. If you get in more than twice, it starts to disrupt sleep, and you're going to end up with daytime sleepiness, not feeling rested. So in my world, when I hear somebody describing that, then what I make on my list of things to do is in males, is it a prostate problem? Could they have sleep apnea? So sleep apnea is a very common cause of nocturia, or frequent urination at night. In women, especially if they're peri or postmenopausal, are they having some detrusor instability or instability of the bladder function, or that's starting to interfere with it? So should they be on hormonal replacement therapy? And so these are things that, as I'm listening to both men and women discuss things, I'm thinking as a primary care doctor, sleep doctor, like making my list of things to do as I think about it. So if they're there for sleep apnea, I'll treat their sleep apnea first, and if they're still peeing a lot at night, then I'll have them see a urology or a gynecologist, somebody to address whatever the issue is, because So I, in my world, I add, when I'm seeing somebody for sleep disruption, that's an issue that I try to run that down.
It doesn't screw up like that 25%, the 50, the 40.
No, but if you're up 5 times an hour and it's each.
Like one
Or
or two
fi-
times a night.
Yeah. But if 1 or 2 times, probably not a big deal.
Okay.
But if it's 5 times a night and it's taking you a half hour to fall asleep each time, well,
You're screwing up the-
yeah, then you're starting to run into big numbers.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, would it be fair, I mean, not fair, but would it be accurate then to say, in regards to teenagers,
Yeah.
that a 7 a.m. school start time or 7:15 a.m. school start time or 7:30 a.m. school start time is working against their natural circadian rhythms and perhaps even increasing anxiety, depression, suicide, ideation, and decreasing their academic performance?
Okay. So I'll just, so this is not opinion.
Yeah.
This is fact, right? The facts are, and so I've actually testified for the Fairbanks North Shore School District. So I'm on record with them, and that the school start time.
We're on the school board, so.
Okay, so I actually testified a number of years ago whenever this came up. I was asked, I was interviewed, and they asked me to come speak to this. So absolutely. So the facts are that is the case, and I mean, I was not part of the decision-making process. I mean, obviously the world is much more complicated than, but there's finances and personnel and that. But if you're just looking at what's best for the kids, like out of the gate, the kids need 8 to 9 hours of sleep opportunity, and so the issue with teenagers is as you enter adolescence, right? The brain is not fully mature until age 26 or 27. It's not. And part of the adolescent brain is a delay in the circadian timing of sleep. So, and just think about your teen years, right? So the bulk of teenagers are going to be night owls, preferentially. And they're not trying to be bad kids. And some of them, usually it's like midnight, 1 o'clock, something like that. But I have some kids that it's 3, 4, and it's pretty, and so we have to manage that. But if they're getting up, if they have to be up at 6, then that means they have to be in bed by 9:30 at the latest, and consistently in order to perform academically. And the literature is really clear, like it's a slam dunk. And so in terms of the science and what's best for the kids. And if you want to look at outcomes, there's outcomes data looking at ACT and SAT scores, and I think the best study was one done in Rhode Island. I think they saw don't hold me to this, but I think they saw a 15% increase in SAT and ACT scores just by changing the sleep times. No other changes in the curriculum. Yeah, it's a big deal, but small community, there's limited resources, it's buses and finances and teachers, and it's a much bigger wheel. But any move to that direction would be a huge help to the kids, and both from a mental health perspective. I mean, that's where in my opinion, it's not opinion. It's where the money is. That's where the facts are. Yep. Yeah. And I'd be glad to talk more about that if you'd like. Yeah.
So I know this is a little bit far afield. I was just wondering, how do pillows fit into this whole thing?
How what?
Pillows.
Pillows.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Can you talk
can. All right.
Use
Or not. Yeah. So, I mean, so again, so much of our sleep is behavioral, and so with respect to mattress firmness, or do I use like really expensive Egyptian cotton sheets, or the pillow type that I have. So part of it's preference and comfort. One. So whatever you're most comfortable with, you should roll with. One. Second thing is there are people with orthopedic issues. So there are people out there that have neck issues. A lot of people, like what I encounter is people get numbness or pain down the arm because when they have a little bit of arthritis in the neck, when they bend the neck long time, at nighttime, it pinches the nerves, they get numbness, it wakes people up, it's uncomfortable. So there's orthopedic issues. So when it comes to pillows, so there are specialty pillows out there to basically support the head so it's not being angled, depending on how you sleep. If you're somebody with hip issues and that, I mean, certainly some kind of mattresses are going to be better. With respect to pillows and sleep apnea, there are sleep apnea pillows that you can buy. I would not be risking my brain or heart on a sleep apnea pillow, all right? Because they're ineffective. They will not, same with the Breathe Right strips. It's not going to treat your sleep apnea, where it's going to lower your risk for heart disease and stroke. Treating sleep apnea, the reason you treat sleep apnea is to feel better and to lower your risk for medical disability from dementia, stroke, and heart disease. Done. And that's why you treat sleep apnea. You're trying to reduce your risk for medical disability. Pillows, don't cut it. And ever. So how's that? Yeah, firm enough statement. All right. Yeah?
Just briefly, so this is very Western world context. And can you speak at all about, how others around the globe sleep? Because some of us have lived many different places, and sleep is very different in different parts of the world.
It is. And so there is a societal, cultural, if you will, sorry about this, the alarm keep going. So if you think of society and culture as part of our training, there's a cultural training that we go through when it's appropriate to sleep. So for example, I mean, we've all watched Downton Abbey, right? I mean, who hasn't watched Downton Abbey, right? So Downton Abbey, so it was common back in colonial times and around the time of Downton. So there was groups of people that it was very fashionable to dress up for dinner. You'd have dinner, and then you'd retire for bed. And then in the middle of the night, they would serve a middle of the night meal. And you would get up, you'd put on your fanciest dressing gown, you would wander down to the dining hall. They would have servants, they would serve you the meal, like 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And then you would get up from the meal, and then you would retire back to bed. And they would get up, like they did in Downton Abbey, like 9, 10 or so, and have breakfast. And that was culturally, they did that. So around the world. But I will tell you, so in our country, we're the high tech, high digital media exposure, high pace. We're very out of touch with our bodies when we should be sleeping. We lack boundaries. Like if you go to Denmark, Sweden, Norway, the Northern European countries, these people have real lives. Like they're going to work 8, 9. They leave work 4, 5. They work 3 to 4 days a week. They make family time priority. They make time to work out a priority. Sleep is not optional. And they make it so it's not just around sleep. Their entire mindset is different. Same thing's true in Africa. Like when I worked in Africa, people are, when the sun goes down, it's time to go to bed because you can't see anything. So might as well go to bed because when the sun comes up, you're working
You
again.
mentioned the pillow, and I looked around people that slept with a wooden block in it.
So part of it, but we live in a really odd time, and we're very out of touch. So if anything, this talk tonight should hopefully give you, rather than going forward with technology, this is a good excuse to go backward and just kind of connect with, what your body is telling you. Like, we have, thousands of years of evolution, and only in the last 140 years have we changed the way we're sleeping for modern time. you're not going to change thousands of years of evolution. Our bodies are built to sleep attuned to the sun. That's just the way it is. You're not changing that. And not if you're planning on functioning optimally or being healthy. I mean, we're just not. And so I think there is a movement to go back, and hope, I see it in my practice every day. I mean, I think you're right. There's a societal cultural difference. So other questions, yeah.
Do people sleep better in Oregon than Fairbanks?
Yes. So the issue. So I actually just prior to the pandemic, I actually was. I had a close colleague that's at Harvard and the Brig, down Dr. Seisler, and he arguably is probably in the top 3 circadian rhythm specialists nationwide, if not worldwide. He is a big dog in my field, and so I actually got him. We actually had him up here. We were going to work with. It was with the psychology department, and we were actually going to start working with circadian timing up here. But anyway, the issue in Alaska is the rate of light change that occurs in the spring and the fall. It's such a rapid change for our brains. It's like jumping time zones very rapidly, and it disrupts our sleep. So when we look back, we looked at Fairbanks Police Department domestic calls, when they get called for domestic stuff. And you could see it. Just the rate of light change we have at this latitude triggers sleep issues and behavioral issues, and so you see domestic violence and that kind of thing. So we did look at that. So we were going to do a big study using UAF students, and then COVID happened, and we were like that close to getting a grant, an NIH grant, and it tanked because of COVID. But I mean, he was around. It was fun to talk to him because he actually had a lot of insight in terms of what it was. And there's very few studies actually worldwide. So we would have been one of the first studies looking at people living at this latitude. And it would have been super interesting, but life is what it is, and it didn't play through. But somebody will do the study sometime. But
maybe 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Leslie.
So I don't know if this is normal or if it's just me. In the summertime, I don't need much sleep. And in the wintertime, I can sleep 24/7.
Right. That is normal.
Okay.
And it's the
So
light.
the way that after hearing this, it sounded much more natural than I ever thought it was. But using the happy light in the morning upsets me to no degree.
Right.
I cannot stand that thing first thing in the morning. And I have very much a night owl, so it's easy for me just to shut it off.
How many lux is it?
What is it?
I don't know,
It's his. He likes it.
I love it.
So again, so there's a lot of the 10,000 lux recommendation is in people like 80s, late 70s, 80s. So it could be that you might get by with less lux. So yeah, so you could get a exactly. So you could get by with that.
I don't get why it makes me so angry.
I can't account for that. So, but you raise an interesting point. So if you watch Fairbanks is fascinating. And so if you watch Fairbanks in the summer, so let's start in the spring. So March happens, and there's more light, and they're palpably euphoric. I mean, you can feel it, and everybody's that way, and it's nice. But what happens is, as we move through the summer and we get all this light exposure, what happens is it shortens the sleep on the front end. We go to bed later, and we're getting up earlier because what you need to know is the light is actually penetrating your eyelids. The frequency of light that matters is penetrating the eyelids. So we're getting so much light exposure on both ends, it's shortening our sleep times. So if you think about, I wasn't up here this summer, but in summers past, what I've seen is there's kind of this euphoria that goes up until the, what's the running race? The midnight sun race, right? And then what happens is, like in July, people start getting irritable. And no, it's true. It's true. I mean, and watch what happens. They start to get a little irritable. You're at the stoplight and people are running their engine, or if you're at the Safeway, people are just a little pushier. And then August happens, and we start getting into the more light dark schedule, and people they tend to calm down emotionally. I mean, Tatiana, you've seen it, yeah. So Tatiana's a PA, works in primary care sleep medicine as well, and we've both seen this phenomenon. And I think it's because we're short sleep in the summer, and you see this kind of this irritability. I don't know how you would describe it, but it's this irritability that happens, and then it reverses like August, September, as the light starts to shift, and I think it's just kind of collective sleep deprivation.
That brightness getting kind of masks some of the sleepiness, so you don't feel it even more arousal.
Right, you're getting, yeah, but you also see it. You see it also play through again on the Fairbanks Police Department, like the blotter page, in terms of domestic violence calls and mental health patients having issues. You see all that. I mean, it plays through in the data as well.
And out of respect for everyone's time, one last question back here.
I'm going to send that a completely different track.
Okay.
The treatment for sleep disorders, sleep apnea and things like that, has for a long time been a CPAP machine.
Yep.
Now beyond just losing weight, to get off of that again, especially if you've been on it for a long time, what are some of the things that you can do to get off of a CPAP machine once you've been on it?
So it's a complicated. I'm going to give you a complicated answer. All right. So so everybody knows what sleep apnea is. The airway is basically relaxing, and the airway is occluding at nighttime. There's several reasons for that. One is anatomic. Long, soft palate, crowded airway, okay? But also, as you get older, the body's ability to control the airway and keep the airway open at night, you lose that. So as you get older, the neuromuscular control that controls the airway to keep it open, you start to lose that. So it's not just anatomic, so weight related. It's also neuromuscular control. So as humans, unlike other mammals like cows, moose, caribou, if you look at them, they have a hyoid cartilage in the neck, and the hyoid cartilage is a cartilage structure. It's the voice box, and it provides structural support to the airway so it doesn't collapse. So even though your dog might snore a little bit, they are not getting apnea. The moose are not getting apnea, all right, because they have high, and the same thing's for children, right? So young children, the number of apneic events per hour should be less than 1 per hour. And that's because young children have a high thyroid cartilage in the neck. As we get older, the way we've evolved is the thyroid cartilage descends, all right? And as we enter adolescence and that. So what happens is as adults age, or as we become adults, from children, the thyroid cartilage, so what happens is we lose that structural support to the airway. And so the upper airway in adults has a tendency to want to collapse by default. So if you do a sleep study on a healthy adult, they're going to wake up between 1 and 4 times per hour, and they don't have sleep apnea. They're just getting 1 to 4 events per hour, and that just reflects the body's natural ability to collapse, all right? It's when it's happening more than 5 times an hour that becomes pathologic, and then you get the diagnosis of sleep apnea. So we were never meant to live as long as we are. Like if you look at the average lifespan in Shakespeare's time for males, the average lifespan in Shakespeare's time was 26, right? Right? And there were reasons for that. Bad water, bad food, sharp pointy things, I mean, and so there were reasons for that. But if you look just prior to World War II, the one statistic I looked at not long ago was the average male lifespan was 35 to 40 for men and 40 to 45 for women. That was the average, all right? Doesn't mean that people didn't live longer. They did. I had a great-grandmother that lived in almost 100, or it was 100. So, I mean, people did, but it wasn't the average. It was not the norm, all right? We now live in a time when you can live for males, it's very possible you could live 80 to 85. For women, it's looking that it's going to be routine for women to age past 90. That's going to be, if not, certainly my granddaughter's generation, it will be, most women are going to be living past 90 in my granddaughter's age. I mean, that's just the way it is. So the point is that physiologically, as we get older, the sleep apnea problem for some people is going to exist. So if you look at the numbers, so 2/3 of patients with sleep apnea have the sleep apnea because they're overweight, and it's an anatomic neuromuscular control issue as a result of the weight, being overweight. If you do the math, though, there's 1/3 of patients that will have sleep apnea even if they're thin. And they can have really bad sleep apnea. It can be awful. So, and they're just anatomically set up for that. So treating the sleep apnea, in my mind, is like, they're going to be people that we can do other things. So other things that could be done, in answering your question, sometimes if they can get the sleep apnea low enough, I could maybe move to an oral appliance, like a mouth guard that a dentist can make that would support the jaw, keep the airway open that way. You can also, there are some surgeries out there, one called and there's a number of surgeries, but the one that's out there that most people have heard of is the Inspire device, or it's the hypoglossal nerve stimulator. It's a pacemaker for the hypoglossal nerve. The hypoglossal nerve is the nerve that makes your tongue stick out, and that opens the airway that way. The problem with surgical outcomes, in my mind, is surgeons measure things differently. So as a sleep doctor, if you have sleep apnea, I'm going to try to get you under 5 events per hour, get you in the normal range. From a surgical viewpoint, so a surgical success in the surgical literature is getting you under 15 times per hour. Now, if you think about it, that means you could be waking up 10 times per hour and still be tired, even though you have your Inspire device in. And that's considered a surgical success, and everybody, all the surgeons are happy. But you as a patient may not be happy because you're still tired, right? And you still have sleep apnea that's disrupting your sleep and favoring weight gain, all right? So I'm not a huge fan of the surgical approach. Now, times are a-changing, and you're going to see a change probably, I want to say in the next 6 months. So there's a new medication coming out. It's a combination of oxybutynin and, it's late, it's a combination medication. And it'll be coming up early next year. And it has been shown to reduce sleep apnea by 15 points per hour. So it'll be a pill that you take at night. And that can be, that's going to be on the market. So there's going to be a role for the medical management of sleep apnea coming up in the not too distant future. So things are changing. So some patients that are on CPAP, we might be able to move them from a CPAP to a pill plus an oral appliance or something like that.
I've seen some other things advertised that are kind of like a TENS unit or an E-stim, so that it starts to collapse with a very mild electric shock
So
that
that
tightens things up. And
yeah.
it's supposed to help condition those muscles so that doesn't happen. And I don't know if that's just a lot of bunk to sell.
I would categorize that as bunk.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I've also
Because the whole
people
airway.
use their voice all the time. Do singers and auctioneers and people like that, do they have problems with sleep apnea?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The only physical therapy thing that actually has been shown to be, well, there are some physical therapy things that can be done that can reduce the severity of sleep apnea a little bit, all right? But the do-it-yourself model is, if you wanted to do something, is the didgeridoo. It's no kidding. Yeah, no, there's studies that show that using the didgeridoo actually strengthens the muscles, and you can reduce the sleep apnea by a little bit. But from my viewpoint as a sleep doctor, so what is the goal? The goal is to feel better and reduce your risk for early disability. The goal is not whether you're using CPAP or not. It's whatever modality we can use comfortably on a daily basis to get you so we're lowering your risk. And I try to be as honest with people as possible. If I think that we're probably looking at lifelong CPAP use, I'm not going to buffalo you. I'm just going to tell you, I will do whatever I can to make it more comfortable. I will help you lose weight if I can to do that. When this new pill comes out, then I'm going to be prescribing that to some patients just to see if I can get them off CPAP. So mean, but there are going to be people out there that if your plan is to avoid disability as you get older and to feel as well as possible, it could be that the CPAP that's just going to be the way it is. But again, my job is to help you think about it in that context and try to make it as comfortable for you as possible.
Out of respect for time, thank you for coming. Surveys on the back table. A huge hand for the ones that
Thank you.